listening to Bleeding Page Podcast. Join authors Chad Lutzke and Jason Brandt as they delve into writing and publishing the dark side of fiction.
Welcome back to Bleeding Page. How's it going, Chad?
It's going all right, man. It's going all right, except for this cold.
Yeah, that sucks.
Yeah, and if people are watching this video and I cut out, it's because I'm probably blowing my nose.
That's always good for an intro when we're the two of us are just talking about stuff.
I didn't want. I watch podcasts sometimes, and I've seen a couple where I think, man, dude, you're being really rude, or even Jeremiah a couple times when we were doing paleo cheese. I'm like, dude, what are you? Some of the stuff that he would bring up or something with the guests. I'm like, dude, what were you thinking? Talking about, what was he talking about? He was talking about edging one time.
Jesus.
To someone he didn't know.
Oh.
And
okay.
yeah, I was like, we laughed about it, but I was like, dude. So yeah, I guess I get kind of self-conscious, and I don't ever want to be rude to a guest. So that's why I told Alan too. Yeah. So if you're watching this and you see me with a blank screen, not being rude, it's don't want to blow my nose in front of everyone.
I just assumed you were railing lines of coke. That's what I would have gone with.
Yeah.
So you said Alan. We interviewed Alan Baxter this week. He's a British-Australian multi-award-winning author of horror and other things. You might know him from The Roo, which just kind of blew up on social media and Amazon 2 years ago with a great cover of a killer kangaroo on it. And it was a great interview. He had lots of interesting tidbits and insights for us. Especially
the fight scene stuff. We got schooled on writing fight scenes very briefly, and he made a lot of sense. And he talked about, it makes sense that Joe Lansdale writes good fight scenes because Joe Lansdale has dedicated his life to martial arts as well, so he knows what he's talking about.
Yeah. I write a lot of fight scenes, so I'm curious to read his book to see what advice he gives on it. I'm kind of curious because I write a lot of fight scenes. My books are basically all action, so I'm kind of curious.
You get to see Jason shed a tear when I talk about my disdain for explosions and car chases.
Yeah, man, that hit me in the soul. That wasn't cool.
Yeah,
it's my whole being. So yeah, I think everyone will like it. He's a really nice guy, and it went well. But you said you want to talk about some book cover work you're doing.
Yeah, I just briefly, I have been doing, I've done covers for years. I've done a lot of my own covers, but I've been doing some commission pieces, lots of pre-mades. I've sold a lot of pre-mades. I've done 3 or 4 commission pieces, only a couple. No, actually I did, I think 14. But most of them I haven't been able to show because, 3 or 4. No, actually, I forgot that I did a 7-book series, so I counted that as one.
Okay.
But most of them I can't show on my website or anything because they haven't done cover reveal. So, I have been trying to. I just got the new Photoshop, the new Illustrator, the new InDesign. Getting a new computer tomorrow, so I'm trying to invest to make even better covers, which I think my covers are pretty good. And I try not to. There's something about looking at a cover and going, "Oh, I know who did that." Something about that bothers me. I don't know why. So I tried to make my covers look different, like they weren't done by the same person. And I guess that says a lot about my writing too. If you read one thing, you haven't necessarily read, all of them. So if anybody's looking, any publishers especially, are looking for another cover artist or any author, indie author. Whatever, looking for covers. I have pre-mades still available up on my website at chadlutzke.com. In the show notes, as always, is our URLs for our writing pages. And so hit me up if you want a. Most of the pre-mades are between 75 and 100, and I do commissions for 200, and then an extra 25 for a wraparound. As long as you want basically essentially another cover on the back. I mean, I don't just do black and then font. I try to do make it look nice. But yeah, right. Hit me up.
Yeah, your work has gotten significantly better over a very short period of time.
Thanks.
It's looking good. That's what I was saying. I think I'm going to have to get you to do do a box set for me.
Yeah, let's do it.
You definitely, the improvement's been wild. So I didn't expect you to get into doing cover art for other people, but it's cool that you're expanding out.
Yeah, I didn't either. I sold a pre-made right away when I showed it to a huge named author. That made me really nervous when he said he wanted it. And
I think I know who you're talking about.
Yeah, it's like, yeah, it's available. And then sold a bunch of other ones, and I thought, well, maybe I do this for myself. Maybe I should, and then I got a commission job, and I just learned along the way. I've always been self-taught with everything, that I do. Painting, skateboarding, guitar, whatever it is, I'm self-taught. So this is another one of those things. And it's easier to self-teach these days because you've got, University 101 YouTube over there where anything that you need, you need to fix your lawnmower, it's on there.
Yeah, absolutely. I've even learned a little bit of Photoshop and I am terrible at it.
Yeah.
Just YouTube helps.
Definitely.
So with that, I think we'll just jump into our Alan Baxter interview.
Sounds good.
Get a lot written today?
Yes.
So, Alan, whenever I see your face pop up or your name, one of the first things I think of are and I think it was the first time we interacted on Facebook or Twitter or something is about those awesome trophies that you have so many of that are like the demon head or whatever. What trophy is that for? Yeah, that is. Do you have one nearby that you can show?
Okay, so for people with video, there's 3 there, and then that gravestone. Oh, that gravestone there is the new version. The demon heads, unfortunately, we don't get anymore. The artist moved to New Zealand, and we can't get those anymore. Those are Australian Shadows Awards. So within Australia, there's 3 major sort of genre awards. So the big one is the Aurealis Awards, which is across science fiction, fantasy, horror, all that sort of stuff, which is a judged award every year. And then we have the Ditmar Awards, which again is across genre, science fiction, fantasy, horror. And that's more like a sort of mini Australian Hugos. It's like a fan voted award. But then the Australian Shadows Awards are specifically for horror and dark fiction. And they're a judged award. So the judging panels are convened every year. Every people submit work that qualifies from the year before. And it's a judged dark fiction and horror award, and I'm lucky enough to have won 4 of them. So
that is so awesome.
Yeah, I'm actually currently ineligible to enter work. Have been for the last couple of years because the awards are managed by the Australasian Horror Writers Association, and I'm now the president of the Australasian Horror Writers Association.
That wouldn't look good then, yeah.
Yeah, I've recused myself. It seems a big conflict of interest to actually enter into any work. But before I joined the AHWA committee, I was fortunate enough to win 4 of them. So I'll probably enter again once I quit the presidency and pass it on to someone else. I might start entering again. But yeah, they're some of the best trophies. I was going to say in horror, but I mean in writing, they're just awesome. But also they are. You can see from the picture, if you're looking on video, they're bloody massive. So they're
huge.
They take up so much shelf space. It's awesome to have several, but it's also kind of a pain. It's like, where do you put them? But that's a small complaint. I'm not going to let that be a negative.
Yeah, those are probably that's probably why I was so enamored by it, because I haven't seen an award that looked that cool and that size.
Yeah. The number of people I've spoken to have said, if I move to Australia, can I enter and try to win one of these awards? And it's like, well, they're open to Australian citizens and residents. So yeah, if you move here permanently, you can start entering your award. But now the new award is the gravestone version. So yeah, we had to get a new award because the artist, to his credit, moved from Australia to New Zealand and is working in movies and prop making and special effects in movies in New Zealand. And when COVID hit, he didn't dare come back and then risk not being able to then get back to New Zealand. So he's based there permanently now in order to keep the work, which means that we can't get those trophies anymore. The molds for them and the rights for them are all in his Melbourne studio gathering dust.
Oh, okay.
So sadly that time has passed. But
oh, wow.
That sucks. Those are cool looking.
Yeah.
They're
cool.
great, aren't they? Yeah.
Well, I guess it's a bonus that you have one that looks different, though. than.
Well, yeah, that's it. So my award shelf, I've actually got 4 Australian Shadows awards, but it looks like I've got different awards. So I've been nominated several times in the Aurealis and the Ditmars, but I haven't actually won those yet. I think I've got 20-something nominations across the years in both of those awards, but I've yet to bring one home. So it's nice to have a variety of stuff up there, even though there's actually 4 of the same award. They're for different things. I've got, for short fiction, for novella, for collection. So yeah, different categories.
Very cool. So how many, now I know you're a hybrid published, but how many of your, first of all, how many books do you have? I know that's in the dozens. Yeah,
well, it's terrible when you can't answer that question, which is what happened recently. So that's why I know now. The Fall, which just came out in April, which was the sequel to the Gulp, that was my 26th book, if you count the stuff that I co-write with David Wood, because David Wood and I we co-write these kind of monster thrillers and sort of occult thrillers. And we've written 8 books together. So 18 of my own, or 26 if you count the stuff with Dave Wood. Yeah.
Now the stuff with Wood, are those self-published as well?
No, those are published through Adrenaline Press, which is a small independent press in the US. So there's Griffinwood Press, who I've been working with for years and years. And my first 2 novels were with Griffinwood Press, and then subsequently I wrote a standalone novel that was sold to Ragnarok Press, and they were going to publish it right before they kind of went under. And that then got picked up along with my Alex Kane books by Griffinwood Press. And Adrenaline Press is an imprint of Griffinwood, and they publish the Jake Crowley and Sam Aston books that I write for Dave.
So out of the 26 books, how many are self-published?
So the Rue, which is the crazy gonzo monster novella, was the first one when I started self-publishing again. I did self-publishing back in the day, and then I kind of started working with big and indie press instead, and then I've kind of gone back to self-publishing a bit. So there was the Rue and the Gulp and the Fall, which is the new one out. Those are the 3 self-published ones most recently. I've also self-published a couple of novellas that were in other things that I subsequently reissued as books on their own. A sort of like a Chinese historical fantasy novella and a science fiction fantasy kind of thing that was serialized on my blog. I serialized it across the course of about 8 months or something back in the day, and then I collected that and self-published that as well. So, and then I have a small writer's guide that's basically, I teach workshops on writing fight scenes, and people kept asking, is there a book about this? So I basically expanded the workshop into a short ebook and self-published that. So
that's cool. Fight scenes, that's something, I don't know that it's necessarily a weakness of mine as much as it is, I just hate it because they kind of bore me but I'm also that guy who I'm not a big fan of like car chases and explosions and stuff. That bores me too, like watching it on a movie. Yeah, I know, Jason, you don't even want to be my friend anymore.
You're hurting me with this.
Yeah. I mean, a
lot of fight scenes are really boring. That's partly why I teach the workshops, because people get it wrong.
It's weird because I get more satisfaction and I'm more entertained out of like an indie film, like an indie drama where they're just sitting in a room having a deep conversation. There's something more about that I get than watching a car chase. They just all feel, I don't know if it's because I can't relate. I've never been in a car chase and I've never been near an explosion like that. So, but having this really well-written conversation or whatever, a lot of my favorite movies are small cast of characters, isolated incidents, and just the small real life things that happen and that you watch the people go through. That kind of stuff really holds my attention. Yeah, for some reason, so when I'm forced to write a fight scene, I get kind of bored. The only fight scenes that I guess that don't really bore me that I've read are maybe Joe Lansdale, and I don't know if that's
a good job.
I don't know if that's because
Lansdale has a martial arts history as well. That's largely what it comes down to. And I hear I'm across all of it. I love those quiet talking head dramas, and I love a mad full-on explosions action movie. but stories that require a different pace, require a different, a set of circumstances. But a lot of the time, even for a story that does require a lot of fighting and whatever else, most people don't really get fighting. Fortunately, most people actually haven't fought that much. So a lot of the time, what they know about fighting is what they've seen in the movies, and the movies are a very specific medium. It's turn-based and it's two-dimensional. It's designed for the medium of film, and that doesn't translate well to writing. Actual fighting, I've had a lifetime as a martial artist and a teacher, and I've fought a lot. And when you know what it sort of looks and sounds and smells and feels like to actually fight, and you put that into the page, you're not then suddenly transposing a book into a transcript of a film for 5 pages and then going back to the book. You're staying in the same medium and doing a good job of it, which is kind of where the workshops came from. So it's about that authenticity. And I don't like the whole writing rules and write what you know stuff, because we'd all be freaking boring. I mean, I've never met a demon, but I've written about them.
Sure.
But it's about sort of learn about what you want to write about. So a lot of the time people will think, I know what fight scenes are like. I've seen plenty of movies with fights, but that's not really what fighting is like. That's not especially authentic. So, short of going down the pub and picking a fight with someone to get a feel for it, you could go to martial arts classes and train or whatever. But you kind of do need that idea of what it is like to fight, so that authenticity comes over. And singularly, almost always the biggest problem is people write fight scenes that are too long and with too much detail. And a fight is fast and visceral and crazy and chaotic, and half the time you don't know what's happening. The most common thing you hear at the end of a fight from someone who just lost is what happened. They wake up.
Yeah.
They're like, well, if they knew what happened, they probably would have avoided the hit. So if you can sort of get that fast, visceral, intense feeling into your fight scenes in a written way, then you don't suddenly jack people out of a book with a boring description situation and then try to get back to a story. So horses for courses, different things required for different reasons. My fight scenes are usually pretty brutal and visceral and sort of short, but I also know fighting, so hopefully I do a half decent job of it.
What you said your martial arts background, what is that?
My day job, I run a Kung Fu academy. I've done martial arts since I was tiny, since I was a kid in primary school. I learned judo and then traveled through lots of different styles. I've trained in karate and Muay Thai and different stuff. And then when I was in my teens, I discovered Chinese Kung Fu. And I've been training and teaching that ever since. And so I run a small academy now in the country town where I live, and I'm part of the international organization. So, martial arts has been part of my life just forever. In the 90s and early aughts, I was fighting and doing a lot of tournament and stuff. And I was a British national champion in the somewhere around mid-late 90s. I can't remember, 95, 96, something like that. And these days I teach other people to do it. My body's not so comfortable taking the hits anymore.
Well, I would like to talk to you about Steven Seagal if you have. I'm just kidding. I've reviewed a bunch of his really horrible movies. I just like trashing on the guy.
Yeah.
Jason has a really successful YouTube channel called So Bad It's Good, where they watch really bad movies and they rate whether it's just a bad movie or whether it's so bad it's good. And there's a lot of commentary, hilarious commentary. And his most successful YouTube videos are when they do a Steven Seagal movie. And
yeah, it's not even close. People love trashing that guy.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, don't get me started. Unbelievable. There are certain people who are just like eternally awful. He's one.
So I take it he's just a poser at this point, I guess.
Yeah. I mean, he's also like Putin's puppet. He sits there floating around in Moscow thinking he's some kind of king shit, and he's this washed-up movie star who was never that great in the first place. So.
I love his hairline the best.
$10 says that if he is in Moscow, he's got a Russian accent already.
Probably.
Because that's his thing, man. He's like the chameleon of horrible accents.
It would be a bad Russian accent too.
He's a gem.
Yeah.
Totally switching gears. I wanted to go back to The Roux. I remember when this came out. Was it really 2020 when you released that?
Yes.
Oh man,
Yeah,
for some reason I feel like I
what
saw.
year it was now. Yeah, so yeah, the Rue came out at the start of 2020. The Gulp came out at the start of 2021, and the Fall came out last month, April 2022. So yeah, that's right.
Okay, that shocks me because I remember that cover going around. I
Yeah,
remember seeing it on Twitter,
Yeah.
like barely on Twitter, and I saw that cover, and I was like, "Oh man, I
yeah.
kind of want to
That
read
was
a kangaroo
strange-
book."
Yeah, I know. It was a strange phenomenon. You know how it started, right? Like it started because of the cover. So there was a news article going around about a kangaroo in the Northern Territory, and it basically said this rogue Roo is going around this small town, digging up gardens and terrorizing the inhabitants, the townsfolk. And loads of people were laughing and joking about this news article, going, "Oh, it's parody. It's got to be a joke, obviously." And I sort of was there on Twitter. I was like, no, that's true. Actually, sometimes roos can be real dicks. And so this whole sort of conversation started about it. And then Keelan Patrick Burke mocked up an old zebra horror cover called The Roo, because he was joking about, this rogue kangaroo terrorizing a town. Someone said, "Oh my God, that sounds like an old zebra horror from the 80s." And so Keelan mocked up this cover because he's a fantastic cover designer. And he just kind of knocked together a simple version of it and posted it on Twitter for a joke. And then everybody was basically saying, "Holy shit, that's amazing. That cover deserves a book. Someone needs to write the book to go with that cover."
I remember that.
And as I was the only Australian in the conversation at the time, people started going, "Alan, you need to write the book." And I started getting DMs from people and stuff. No, seriously, it would be amazing. Write a book about a killer kangaroo. So I contacted Keelan and I was like, "Hey, can I have that cover?" Because I was thinking, this was right in the it was around the end of 2019 when all this was going on. And I was kind of mixed in with things, trying to get stuff done. And I had this idea for a short story, and I was looking for a monster to write this short story. And then it occurred to me, it's like, I could actually expand that, and instead of use those story ideas, but use a kangaroo, go a bit gonzo with it instead, just for fun. And I said to Keelan, "Hey, can I have that cover? If I can have the cover, I'll write the story. How much do you want for it?" And he said, "Oh, look, that's too shabby. If you're going to actually use it, I'll do a proper one." And he gave me a really good rate and did the proper version of the cover, and let me have that. And so then I wrote the book to go with it and just self-published it. It's like a 30,000 word novella. And it was basically a joke. I was like, "Oh, that'll be fun. I'll try this. It'll be a bit of a laugh." And people kind of went nuts for it.
Yeah.
I said before, if all my books were as popular and sold as well as the Roo, I'd be a lot better off than I am now. It seems, for especially that first year of release, it was just going ballistic. It was amazing. But now I'm the Roo guy, which is also, and I'm trying to push beyond those boundaries now. Equally though, because that was so well received and people were so like, "This is pure Australian horror. This is fantastic. We need more of this." That's what made me go ahead and write the Gulp, because I'd had the ideas for these stories set in this weird Australian harbour town. And I kind of wanted to write these stories and was just not really sure there was going to be that much interest. Was it worth the effort doing it? And because the Roo went so popular, I was like, well, shit, maybe I will. And so then we were deep in the pandemic. So rather than trying to concentrate on bigger projects, I was trying to transition my Kung Fu school to teaching via Zoom. We had my kid home, so we were doing homeschooling because the schools were closed and all that. So I was like, you know what, I'm just going to write those Australian harbour town horror stories that I've been harbouring for so long. And so that's how the Gulp came about. So the Roo effectively led directly to the Gulp. That's sort of the process we went through.
Speaking of the Gulp, I just I bought it recently. I just finished it a couple days ago.
Oh.
It was a lot of fun. That was a lot of fun.
I'm glad you liked it.
It was every story, there's five essentially novellas in there, and or novelettes, and they're all very different, different levels of intensity and gruesomeness. I think that I can't remember the titles right offhand, but I think Mother Blossom or something like that.
Mother in Bloom.
Mother in Bloom.
The T-shirt I'm wearing at the moment as well.
Oh, yeah.
Limited edition, and that's the cover art.
I saw Paul, Thunderstorm Paul, post something, and as I was reading that, and I was like, that must be from that story, that artwork.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, a lot of people call it their favorite, that one.
Yeah, I noticed that too when I you do your Goodreads update and it posts to Twitter, and a couple people mentioned that that story, and that was my favorite. And the one I think it's called 48 to Go was my other favorite.
Well, those 5 stories, like that was the idea, is that I wanted to sort of dig into a different vibe of horror with each story. There's like body horror, there's crime horror, there's almost like a twist on a vampire kind of idea, and but all pinned together by being set in the same weird place. And as when you get to the end of those 5, you realize that they're all kind of interconnected, like characters and situations cross over and crop up in different stories.
Yeah, that was very cool.
That was the 5. And then the Fall is another set of 5, and across all 10, you get the bigger picture. So I was kind of terrified I wouldn't pull it off, but the reviews so far of the Fall, people seem to be really pleased, and it sounds like I've basically pulled off this idea, 10 novellas across 2 books, making essentially one kind of mosaic novel. And so, it seems to have worked so far. I'm pleased with the reception.
I don't know that I've read anything, I haven't read Goblin, and I know it didn't start with Mail Man. I know this, people doing this for years, but I don't know that I've ever read one, but the idea really appeals to me, having those, because I do Easter eggs anyway, but to strengthen those eggs and have them, interweave together even more sounds, especially if you're doing, because I'm such a, everything I write is so short. So writing something that's between 20 and 30,000 words seems feasible, and then putting them together. So maybe one day I'll give it a shot. Yeah,
it's worth it. It's worth it. I do well with shorter fiction. I mean, I've got my 8th solo novel is coming out with Cemetery Dance later this year. And I really enjoy full-length novels. And so, that is something I do as well. But I really enjoy short fiction, and especially with horror and dark fiction, that novella length, anything between about sort of 10, 15 up to 35,000 words, you can tell some really great stories. And I really like to play in that. And I love that whole sort of anthology vibe, like, Creep Show and that sort of stuff.
Yeah.
And then there's things like Stephen King, with Derry has a lot of, or Castle Rock more particularly, has a lot of stuff that repeats in those places. So it was all those kind of vibes I wanted to play with. And it was interesting when I wrote the Goblin, Josh Malerman's Goblin was only available in the, whatever it was, Earthling Publications or whatever. I didn't get it. And so I didn't, and a lot of people kept saying, and even Sarah Pinborough, I was lucky enough that she said, this is like, if you enjoy Goblin, you need to read Tales from the Gulp. So it's like, wow, that's a hell of an endorsement. And then Goblin finally got its sort of mass release, and I got a copy, and I was like, okay, I get it. I see why people keep drawing these comparisons. And there is that cool thing about having one location, and that's what I wanted to do. I wanted to create this universe that I could revisit. And so Culpeper is this little town in the middle, and north and south of it are these 2 bigger towns, and that whole sort of fictional geographic region I can play with now. There's a short story set in one of the towns that's coming out in an anthology from Bad Hand Press later this year. I'm working on a novel at the moment that's set in the hills up behind those towns. And so I just get to, like you said, you get to play with those Easter eggs. Then you get to sort of, push them a little bit further. And so even if it's just something as simple as someone goes, oh God, that's Endon, that's the town from, that's north of Culpeper. You just mention it in passing and carry on. I'm such a nerd that I just love that stuff. And so I assume other people get into that stuff as well. So these little mentions and these little extra bits for constant readers,
Yeah.
You mentioned you self-published and then you started dealing with presses, and now you're getting into self-publishing again. What's made you do the transition back and forth?
Well, when I was first kicking off, I did the whole thing. I got with my first novel. I got an agent, and we went to the major publishers, and twice we got as far as acquisitions with the big publishers, and it never quite got over the line. And this was back in the day when, the beginning of the new renaissance of self-publishing. I'm talking like 2006 or so, I think. And so I just decided, well, I'll just see what it's like, with print on demand and the rise of ebooks and all that sort of stuff. So I self-published the first novel, and then in the meantime wrote the sequel to it, and then reissued the first one, and along with the second one. And that was good, but what it also showed to me at the time was that there was a lot of work in self-publishing that I didn't want to do. Although, the rewards are there. But then when Griffinwood Press offered to pick up those 2 books, well, that was great. I was like, yeah, cool, that's good. I can just get on with the writing, which I did. And then, I kept working. I sold a trilogy to HarperCollins here in Australia, and was also then working with other small press, Australian small press and US small press. And that was ticking along well. And then a couple of times, because of the way publishing changes so rapidly, a couple of times publishers collapsed and took books with them. And I was fortunate enough to get the rights back and managed to do stuff with those. But that also started me thinking that I needed to make sure I didn't have too many things in places that I didn't have much control over. So while I had the HarperCollins trilogy and various other books with indie presses, Australia, the UK, and the US at the time, I started thinking, well, maybe I ought to also have at least a few things that are entirely under my control, so that they're not subject to the vagaries of indie publishers going under, or changes to the industry that I can't have any effect on. And I started thinking about maybe I should get back into self-publishing and see what happens. Also, because by that point, I'd been at it for a while, and I had a sort of enough of a following that I figured, if I do release stuff independently, it's not going to be such a struggle like it was in the first instance, because I've got people who already kind of know about me and know about my work.
You've got a readership, yeah.
Yeah, and plus the process is easier, because when I was first doing it, it was kind of new. It was a real, it was a bit of a shit fight trying to figure out how everything works, whereas now it's so streamlined. And so when I was thinking about maybe I ought to do that, I hadn't decided what to do yet. And that's when the whole thing with the Roo came up, and I was like, well, there's the opportunity. If I buy that cover off Keelan, put it together. And so I quickly reskilled, went back and relearned how to do all that stuff, and got some help with a couple of the indie presses that I work with, which was handy. They gave me some help with layout internally and stuff like that. And so that was the kickoff to me doing stuff independently again. So I self-published the Roo and the Gulp and the Fall. But in the meantime, I do still pursue traditional publishing. Like I said, I've got a novel with Cemetery Dance later this year, which is great. I mean, they're a publisher I've been hoping to work with since, forever. So I think that diversification of, there's stuff publishers can do for you that you can't do for yourself, and there's stuff you can do for yourself that publishers can't do for you. And if you're one of those people who got the big 5 publisher and got a strong following, and then that publisher constantly pushed you and constantly topped up the marketing budget and pushed you, then great. That's the way. You just do the writing, they do all the work for you, and that beyond that, that's all you need. But that's such a small percentage of writers right at the top tier that get that fortunate. And for most of us, it's always going to be, a jobbing a gig. And so I figure that the more variety you have going on, the better. So that's where I plan to be. And if at some point some big publisher says, we want to buy your back catalogue, we're going to promote the shit out of you and whatever, maybe go for it and see what happens, because that bookstore penetration, that big marketing budget, that's what the big publishers can do that we just can't manage on our own, at least at the moment. And there are still a lot of people who do shop by going into brick and mortar stores and asking, what's new, what's good kind of thing. So it's all about trying to reach as wide a readership as possible. And so, yeah, that's a lot of what's behind the decisions I make. And also largely you write the books that not a lot of publishers are necessarily going to pick up. So it's like, well, I'll do it myself.
Sure.
Yeah.
Do you mentioned getting in bookstores. With any of your self-published stuff, have you tried using Barnes & Noble Press to get into, say, Barnes & Noble?
Not especially because being over here, that it's more difficult. We only have Barnes & Noble online here, like we don't have Barnes & Noble bookstores here. There's a couple of bookstore chains. One of the biggest issues is that when you use Ingram for production, Australian bookstore chains don't have trade accounts with Ingram. They use Baker & Taylor as their distributor mostly. There's a couple of other smaller distributors as well. But basically, it's difficult to get into a distributor where they're not basically paying import prices for books. And books are already very expensive in Australia. And so if you try to get through an indie store, they become even more expensive. And because they don't have accounts directly with Ingram, you can't really get them to sort of pick up and stock. And there are some sort of intermediary distribution companies that are bridging that gap. And some of the small press in Australia are working with those companies in order to get in store. But that's because they have a wider catalogue and a bit more capital to back up putting stock out and taking returns, which is, I mean, as you know, that was really difficult to do that independently, just on your own with your own books. Like, the capital required and the potential for loss on returns is makes it prohibitive. But equally, there is a pretty strong independent bookstore vibe in Australia, and there's a handful of indie bookstores who we got to the point now where they'll actually email me and go, "Hey, new book out, send me this many," and they'll actually, rather than taking consignments or sale or returns or whatever, they'll just buy them directly off me and put them on the shelves, and then every once in a while hit me up for some new copies, which is awesome. So with the independent stores, especially the genre stores who specialize in, science fiction, fantasy, horror, that kind of thing, I do have a bit of a relationship with a bunch of those, and so I'm in those stores in the big cities. But generally, when it comes to that broad range bookstore chain distribution, it's almost impossible in this country to get that. Some of the smaller presses are starting to make inroads now with that, but yeah, not without capital, unfortunately.
I mean, it's similar here. That's why I was curious. I don't know of too many indie authors who have had a lot of success selling in bookstores. I mean, there's got to be a market there to be tapped, but I'm not really sure of too many people who have done it at a large level.
There's definitely a market for it in terms of readers, but it's one of those things where bookstores are not really keeping up with the industry in those independent terms. So because they have relationship with distributors, and distributors work with the major publishers, and the major publishers issue the catalogs, you kind of get that homogenous set of books that is always getting bought in and pushed out, and you get those, new debut books that get their 6-week window in the bookstores, which is what happened with the Alex Kane trilogy with me and HarperCollins. I was in all the bookstores. I was in airport bookstores. I would travel to a con and I would go in the airport bookstore, and there's Bound sitting on the shelf. It's mind blowing. It's cool, but it was done and dusted in no time. And it's still out there, and it's still selling, and it's still people, bookstores can still order it, and I still sell it at conventions and all that sort of stuff. But that transitioning that idea and that process to a broader range of more independent stuff is the problem. And largely I think it's a case of bookstores don't have the staff to manage distribution of lots of titles, so they pretty much take what the publishers put through the catalogs that go through the main distributors, which is understandable. Most bookstores, that's why the indie stores are good, because they do have a bit more time to look at what's out there and pick and choose stuff, because they have a more focused attention of what they want in terms of genre. But it would be really good if there was a situation that could develop where you would have a decent distributor with a decent policy on costs and returns and stuff that would catalog stuff outside of the big 5 publishers. And that's sort of what's happening with some of the indie presses now. They're starting to breach that gap by getting their catalogs into intermediary distributors. But it's a really difficult process. And again, particularly when it's just you doing it on your own, it's hard. So people have been talking about a bunch of, they're saying, why don't indie authors all get together and make a kind of conglomerate of their own? So they're all independent themselves, but they put together a kind of a group catalog. They take that catalog to one of the distributors, and that distributor then approaches stores, and then it funnels in and funnels back out again, and the indie authors can supply to that distributor if it gets picked up. But of course, there's a lot of stages, a lot of steps in that, and potentially a lot of cost. And books in Australia are already so expensive. It's not necessarily an easy process. I think we're getting there. I think people are slowly leaning more towards that. They recognise the benefit of that, but it's birth pangs are slow.
Sure.
Yeah, I have noticed that the small presses are doing that, focusing a lot more on distribution, and which seems, being traditionally published was always, just like I think with any writer, it was always like the goal from the beginning. But then after listening to thousands of hours of all these self-publishing podcasts over the last 8 years, that starts to become, more, and then when the stigma starts to go away, that became attractive. But now, I'm seeing some of these small presses that are worrying more about distribution, and then you're seeing books like Eric LaRocca's book, that sold like, I don't know, 10,000 or 20,000 within like
10,000
the first
print copies.
within the first like 6 weeks. Yeah, and it's like I couldn't do that. I mean, that's especially for a standalone novella. That's like series stuff down the road. That's like series, different genre. And so yeah, I still self-publish. I still, I'm going to continue being a hybrid. But this distribution thing excites me, and I know that Stygian Sky Media is big on that too. They just got to land at some deal with. I'm not exactly sure how it works, but with somebody reputable that is just really going to help them with their thing. They were just on the cover of, I can't remember what the name of the magazine is, but I see Bright Things, and I see other small presses, and I know that the big five, they they've got like eyes on what even self-publishers are doing, like how because some of these self-publishers, and I've seen you on like Joanna Penn, and some of those people are making way more than any traditionally published person.
I mean, that's true. There's some indies out there who are absolutely killing it, and part of what got me the deal with HarperCollins in Australia for the Alex Kane trilogy was they were aware of my first two novels, the Balanced Duology that came out, and when I started talking to the editor there, she was aware of those two books, and they were asking me. They straight up asked me about numbers and stuff on those two books and what sort of following I had, and these things. Even back then, this was when was it? 2013. I signed that trilogy with HarperCollins. It came out 2014. And it's a shift. I mean, it's Harper Voyager, it's the SFF imprint of HarperCollins, and there's not really a Harper Voyager in Australia now. They're kind of, these big industry publishers kind of shift their imprints and stuff. So the books are still there, and they're still effectively Harper Voyager, but the industry has changed so much just in that time that it's different. But like you say, those big publishers do pay attention to what's going on, and the smaller publishers and the indies are trying to emulate a version of the distribution that the big publishers do. And I do kind of see it all slowly coming together a bit more. And I do kind of see a point. There was a time when if you wanted to self-publish, you had to find a printer and have, 1,000 copies in boxes in your garage. Yeah. Whereas now with print on demand and stuff, of course, that takes that weight away from us. And now we also have the big publishers who are not doing the print runs anymore. They're going, well, once these books go off the main shelves, we'll keep them in print by moving them to print on demand, and they fulfill orders the same way that we do. So HarperCollins are filling orders through print on demand the same as I am sitting here in this room. And so that sort of blur comes together, and like I'm same as you, I'm a little bit excited about how distribution might work, because I can see that starting to happen as well, that those lines become a bit more blurred and stuff can go into distribution, whether you have an account with the big publisher or whether you're an indie doing it on your own. There might be pathways to find that distribution catalog that can potentially then go through to bookstores. And the big publishers do pick up the indie successes, and I know indie successes that don't want to be picked up. A friend of mine who writes fantasy in Australia signed an amazing deal with Audible for a new fantasy series, like a 6-figure deal with Audible, and he was self-publishing before, and for whatever reason his audiobooks went ballistic. And then Harper Voyager US came to him and said they wanted to pick up the series. And they were offering him big money for the series. And he was like, well, print an ebook, sure, but I've got a great deal with Audible. And they were like, well, no, we want audio as well. And he said, well, you can't have audio because the deal with Audible is too good and you can't match it. I'm making a very short version of this. And in the long run, he ended up going back to self-publishing the print and ebook version because the deal with Audible for the audiobook was too lucrative to turn down. So he's effectively still self-published in print and ebook, and signed directly to Audible for the audiobooks. And, he actually turned down arguably the biggest genre publisher in the world for a trilogy series because they couldn't match what he was offered for the audiobook. And so he self-published those, and he's doing fine, doing great. So,
yeah, wow.
Yeah, the lines are blurring all over the place.
Speaking of audio, have you had some success there? I know it's harder with shorter fiction, particularly on Audible, to get a foothold.
Yeah, it is. Some of my stuff is in audio. The Griffinwood, who picked up the Alex Kane series in the US, which is the one with HarperCollins here, and who picked up the original duology. Those 5 are all in audio, and they also organized Hidden City, which is a standalone sort of weird urban horror novel that I wrote. That's also in audio and on Audible. The stuff I write with Dave Wood, I was going to say all of that. I'm not sure if the last one is done yet, but basically those are all on Audible as well. But the other indie stuff that I've done, the short fiction collections and novella collections, I've got a novel called Devouring Dark with Grey Matter Press, and the Eli Carbon novella series with Grey Matter Press. Those aren't in audio yet. It's a bit more difficult to try to get those organized. And so, yeah, I often get, is your stuff in audio? It's like, well, yeah, some is, some isn't, but the stuff that is seems to be doing okay. I don't really seem to be going big in audio at this point, but again, that could partly be because my whole catalog's not available in audio yet. So yeah, it's I don't know. It's a bit of a mystery, but it would be good to get those things done. But especially with the indie stuff, when you're looking at good audiobook production at probably at least $150 per finished audio hours, it's a big commitment to, if you've got a 10-hour novel or a 10-hour collection, that's a big chunk of change to just drop in the hope that it gets made back in audio, which would potentially take a long time without that backing. So yeah, I don't know. I'd like to see it all in audio. It's the fastest growing segment of publishing at the moment. More people are getting into audio. Everything else is still doing okay, and audio's like skyrocketing. But yeah, it's an expensive proposition. So
yeah, Audible's flipped that market in such a weird way with the membership model, because anything under 7 hours, I mean, good luck. You're really going to struggle to sell that because people don't want to use a credit on it.
Yeah, and if people can use a credit for 15 hours or for 3 hours, they're going to use it for 15 probably. So
yeah, and I can see from my books, the longer sales are. I have a 5-hour book on there, doesn't sell shit. 6-hour does not that great. Once I start hitting 7+, it starts doing better, and then I put a box set up, and that's been doing great because it's over 20 hours. So 1 credit, people are super happy with that.
Yeah, you get a trilogy for a credit. That's good, isn't it?
How do you do a box set if you have different? Can you do a box set if you have different narrators for like for my, like if I want to take 3 or 4 novellas, put those into a box set? Can I even do that with different?
If you own
narrators?
the rights, sure. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I have a royalty split.
Oh, I don't think you could do that.
Okay.
No. So the one I did is all with the same narrator for the one.
Yeah, I figured. Right.
So that was easy. And he likes the money, so that was an easy sell. Any other questions you want to throw in?
No. Do you want to hit him with the last 2?
Yeah, sure.
Same ones.
So we ask everyone this, and we've gotten some really interesting answers. So don't screw it up, man. Yeah, okay, no pressure.
You're doing good so far.
Of all the things you've done throughout your career, what is the one thing that you would say did not give you a good return on investment? The one thing you would tell people, don't waste your time doing it, whether it's blogging or literally anything.
Wow. It's a tough one. I mean, generally speaking, the vast majority of advertising that you can afford as an indie is not worth the cost. These days it's changing a little bit, I think, like with Amazon ads and targeted Facebook advertising and stuff, you can develop the skills to really target stuff and get good return sometimes. And I know some people do. I know there's an independent publishing group. I had to quit. It was a bit too cultish for my liking. It was a group on Facebook. But Dave Wood is still there, and he says, he jokes about the people who complain that they dropped 50 grand on Facebook advertising this year and only got 150 grand back when they dropped 30 grand the year before and made 200 and stuff like this. It's like the numbers are just kind of insane. But these are people who make it basically a full-time job so they'll sit there for 3 hours a day watching the analytics and constantly tweaking these ads and watching the click-throughs and all that that sort of stuff. And so, man, I can't be that kind of accountant. Like that's not what I want. They'll churn out 10 books a year, like 50,000 word novels in a series and just smash them out one a month, but basically spend most of their time tweaking algorithms. And as far as I can tell, unless you're willing to put something like that level of effort into things, that whether it's online advertising, print advertising, anything else, generally does not really give you much return on investment, compared to trying to build an organic readership just through general kind of interaction and putting out books and being part of a community, basically, whether it's online or on the convention circuit and all that stuff. For me, what works basically is time in the game, putting out books, being around. More often than not, I'll never say no to an opportunity if it comes up. If I get invited to guest at a con, or if I get invited to a group signing or whatever, I will almost always say yes if it's feasible to do it, because everything you do might attract one reader. That one reader might be someone who drops a blog review to 1,000 readers, who then, you can never sort of plan for that kind of fractal expansion. So you just kind of take those opportunities. But when you try to create that with advertising or stuff, it never really seems to work for me. But like I said, I'm not really that kind of accountant. I can't really figure it out, tweak the numbers and target the ads the same sort of way. So for me, generally just being around and writing books is what works. And when I actually try to advertise anything specifically, it just doesn't seem to work. I've paid, I've dropped $100 for a quarter-page ad in some horror magazine, or just crickets, seen nothing of it. So yeah, those sort of things for me, they just don't seem to work. If you have that kind of big publisher marketing budget where you can drop a big chunk of change to really saturate something, like if you could afford billboards or ads on buses, those ads would probably pay back. But when you don't have that kind of money to drop into advertising, you can't see that kind of return on investment. So if you're trying to drop lots of small amounts into ads, you're just kind of pissing that money away. As far as I can tell, it just doesn't seem to return. So, yeah.
All right. What do you think has worked the best for you?
Time, honestly. Like I've watched by being around, by putting books out, by sort of consistently trying to make sure that what I put out there is good, and slowly building relationships with reviewers who have, picked up my work and offering them the next thing, and just kind of being in the game and producing work. I mean, there's that whole sort of principle, the best advertising for your book is to write another book or to write the next book. As far as I can tell, that really seems to be the thing that does work. Sometimes I get, that people say, prolific author Alan Baxter. It's almost like prolific is a pejorative. It's like, that's not a bad thing, is it? But a lot of the time, that when people see you putting work out, a lot of the time, if readers finally decide to check something out, it's often sometimes it's because there's just a massive appeal for whatever reason in that particular title or cover or whatever they see. But for a lot of readers, it'll be like, okay, I keep seeing this guy's name around. What's this one? And they'll check and they'll see that if they like it, there's this back catalogue to go through. There's these things they can look at. And so they go, you know what, I'll give it a chance, because everybody's looking not only for a good read, but people are looking for new favorite authors. And if they know that there's someone that if they try this book and they really like it, there's 10 more books by that same person. It's kind of a safe bet to go, well, that's great. That takes care of some reading for me, That seems to be what really works. So, sort of frequently, it doesn't have to be 5 a year or even 1 a year or whatever. But when you've been in the game for a while and you've got a back catalogue of several books and you're developing some kind of reputation for quality in what you do, that to me seems to be what has slowly built my readership more than anything else.
Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And that's been my experience perfectly. Everything you just said. Yeah.
Outstanding. Well, thanks so much for coming on, man. It was great talking to you.
No worries. Thanks for having me. It's good to talk to you guys.
Yeah, it was good to finally, we haven't talked a lot, but it's good to finally, see your face, meet you.
Yeah. It's something that there's that much interaction online that it's, you kind of know a lot of people and you talk to a lot of people, but you don't do this thing where you stop and actually have a chat, which is, it's nice to do that and get this. It's a bit more human, isn't it, than typing through Twitter or whatever.
Definitely.
I mean, anything is more human than being on Twitter.
True. Yeah. Twitter is just a snapshot of the worst of humanity a lot of the time. Although, having said that, I am a big fan of Twitter, but I curate my Twitter feed ruthlessly. I will block and mute with abandon because people, you echo chambers and whatever. It's like, well, no, I wouldn't stand in a pub and listen to some dickhead ranting on at me about stuff. I would walk away. And I kind of treat Twitter the same way. It's like, there's so many great people out there. There's so many interesting conversations to have. Every time idiots come along, just bang, block them, just get them gone. And so I think that's really this. You don't have to subject yourself to the worst of Twitter. And I think, I think ruthlessly curating your Twitter feed turns it into a pretty good place to be. So yeah, you still get caught in the storms, of course, but
yeah.
All right, man. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
No worries. Thanks for having me.